Imagine your life is a sandcastle, built grain by grain with dreams, effort, and love. Now, imagine a giant wave comes and washes it all away, leaving only the empty beach. This isn't just my story. It's the story of anyone who has ever had to learn how to rebuild from nothing. And it's an honor to share it with you here on A Coffee, a Story. My name is John, and it doesn't matter if you're listening from vibrant New York City, from the vast and serene Florida Keys, or from organized Geneva, Switzerland, where I live today. Because pain, just like hope, has no borders. This is the story of how I had it all: a life by the sea and the Keys, success in New York, a family that was my fortress, and how, in an instant, an accident on the mountain roads of North Carolina took it all away. It's an account of betrayal by those I thought were friends, about the abyss of loss and the darkest depression. But above all, it is proof of how the truest love, the one that remains when everything else is gone, can be the lighthouse that guides us back to shore. If you want to join me for more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. And if you like it, leave a thumbs up and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It'll be like we're continuing to have this coffee together. Now, let's step together into the love we had left. Before the skyscrapers of New York City, before the college textbooks, my whole world was the beach of a small coastal town in the Florida Keys. A place where time wasn't measured in hours, but by the length of the shadows the sun painted on the white sand street. There, life smelled of salt spray and jasmine, of the sea breeze that dried the clothes on the line and carried, on days with an east wind, the murmur of distant stories. My grandfather taught me that the Atlantic wasn't just blue, but had 1,000 shades of it. The sky blue of dawn, the vibrant azure of noon, and the silvery indigo where the moon bathed. My days were simple and perfect. I'd run barefoot on the wooden pier, slippery with seaweed, the sound of my footsteps echoing on the planks. My hands learned the rough texture of fishing nets and the cool smoothness of the little rocks I'd keep as treasures in my shorts pocket. My mother was the lighthouse of that little world. Her voice, singing old tunes while she cooked, was the soundtrack of my security. I remember the endless patience with which she taught me to tie the laces of my first sneakers on the front porch of our house with the sea as our witness. "Look, Johnny, it's like tying a sailor's knot," she'd say, and her fingers, strong and full of love, guided mine. It was a simple, profound magic. That was true wealth, not the kind I would later chase in the big city. It was the wealth of sunsets shared in silence, of laughter that echoed in the town square, of the immeasurable value of a hand that holds you before you learn to be afraid. Those days of sun and salt created an invisible anchor within me, an internal compass that, without me knowing it at the time, would always point my way back home. It was pure happiness, the kind you don't name because you simply live it. The kind that, a long time later, when everything turned dark, would become the memory that kept me from sinking for good. Because when you lose everything, you cling to the first thing you ever had. And the first thing I ever had was that sea. There came a time when the edge of the sea became too small for me. The very ocean that had shown me immensity began to whisper that there were other vastnesses to discover. It was a sweet and, at the same time, painful awakening, like that first lump in your throat when you say goodbye. I traded the smell of salt spray for the scent of textbook ink. I traded the sound of the waves for the noise of pages turning in the capital city's library. College in Miami was my first map of the real world. There, between calculations and assignments, I discovered a side of myself I didn't even know, a quiet but stubborn ambition. It wasn't a desire to have, but a desire to show, to build, to leave a mark that the tide couldn't wash away. I remember the clarity that hit me one particular evening, studying by the window of my student apartment. The golden light reflected off the glass of the taller buildings, and I thought, I want to understand how this city works. I want to be part of that rhythm. I graduated not just with a diploma, but with a plan in my head and my heart full of that unique mix of fear and certainty you only have in your early 20s. New York City wasn't just the next stop, it was the destination. The city was the epicenter of everything I wanted to be. The farewell from my keys was a quiet one. One last walk on the pier, one last look at the horizon where the sky kissed the sea. My mother held me tight with that silence that says everything and whispered in my ear, "Don't forget where you put down roots, my son." I packed that memory in my suitcase, right next to my clothes and my dreams. When I boarded the interstate bus, I knew a part of me would stay forever in that little piece of the Keys. But another part, bigger and braver, looked ahead with a question burned into its soul. Can I conquer New York without letting New York conquer me? These were the last days of Johnny, the boy from the coast, and the first steps of a man who believed with absolute faith that he could tame the future. New York hit me with a punch of adrenaline and noise. The murmur of the sea was replaced by the roar of traffic on the FDR Drive, and the open sky of my childhood was sliced by the silhouettes of cranes and glass skyscrapers. At first, it was a wonderful whirlwind. Every morning was a rush, every meeting a challenge, every closed contract another step on a ladder that seemed to have no end. And it worked. The business took off with a force I hadn't even imagined. The startup I launched with 2 partners in a tiny office grew, it multiplied. We started appearing in magazines, giving talks. The money came, and with it, everything that was supposedly success. A high-rise apartment with a view of Central Park, an imported car, clothes that cost more than my father's first yearly salary. But in the middle of that hurricane of achievements, something began to change. Glasses of wine on rooftops replaced beers at the corner bar. Conversations were no longer about dreams, but about numbers, strategies, and expansion plans. People constantly surrounded me, bright smiles, pats on the back, promises of future projects. I was at the center of the world, or at least of my world. Yet, in the moments of silence, going back alone to my impersonal apartment, a small question began to scratch at my conscience. Who are all these friends who don't know the smell of salt spray from my coastal town? What remains of the boy who collected smooth stones on the beach in this man who signs million-dollar contracts? Success was a glass tower. From the outside, it was all light and brilliance. From the inside, sometimes all you could see was the void. I had conquered the city, just as I wanted. But in the process, I felt like a small piece of my soul had been left behind at the bus station, watching the last bus that could take me home drive away. I was a winner. I had everything. And for the first time in my life, I began to understand the subtle but profound difference between having it all and having what truly matters. The glass tower of success was a noisy place. Even in the silence of my high-end apartment, the echo of meetings, the hum of anxiety, and the constant whisper of expectations filled the void I refused to name. I attended events, corporate dinners, gallery openings, always surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. I met Isabella on a Saturday morning in a place that had nothing to do with my business routine, the Union Square Green Market. I was there by chance, pressured by a partner who swore the tomatoes there tasted different.
I was walking distractedly among the stalls, looking without seeing the piles of colorful vegetables when I saw her. She was standing in front of a flower stand, wearing a simple cotton dress, her feet bare and a pair of leather sandals. In her hand, she held a bouquet of sunflowers with the same naturalness with which I held a pen. But it wasn't the flowers that held me, it was her expression. While everyone around seemed to carry the invisible weight of their worries, Isabella's face radiated a tranquil presence. She wasn't just buying flowers, she was enjoying that simple moment, chatting with the elderly vendor as if they were old friends, her easy laugh cutting through the morning air like the sound of a bell. Our eyes met by chance over a pile of pumpkins. Me with my rigid executive posture, her with her sunflowers and disarming smile. Something inside me shuddered. It wasn't a lightning bolt, nor a spark of cinematic passion. It was something deeper and rarer, the quiet that comes after a long storm. It was as if, after years of hearing only the world's noise, I could finally listen to a clear and serene melody. "You look a little lost," she said, her soft New York accent laced with genuine curiosity. The conversation flowed with a naturalness that took me by surprise. I found out she was an architect, but not the kind that designed glass skyscrapers. She specialized in community housing projects, creating beautiful and functional spaces for those who needed the most. With her hands, she built models of miniature worlds, tangible dreams. "It's no use building for the sky," she told me, as we walked through the park, her sunflowers swaying with each step. With Isabella, I learned to laugh for real again. Not the polished laugh from business dinners, but the laughter that comes from the soul, the kind that makes your stomach hurt. I learned to walk without hurry again, to notice the color of the sky at dusk, to find beauty in a street hot dog and a lemonade. She took me to discover hidden bars in the West Village, old bookstores in the East Village, and parks where families had picnics on Sundays. She didn't understand corporate strategies or balance sheets, and that was her greatest asset. When I tried to talk about my business, she would listen carefully, but then ask a question that went straight to the heart. "And does all that make you happy, John?" Or, "What story do you want to tell with this company?" Isabella wasn't impressed by my success. She was interested in my essence. And little by little, she helped me rediscover pieces of myself that I had left behind in my hurry to conquer the world. She was my antithesis and my safe harbor, a gentle reminder that life could be more than a succession of goals and achievements. And then, on one of those quiet Sundays in Central Park, watching families stroll and children chase soap bubbles, I realized I had fallen in love. Not with the talented architect or the beautiful woman, but with the person who made me want to be more human. For the first time since I had left the Keys, I was no longer looking at the next step. I was, finally, appreciating the view.
The day Michael was born was the day a piece of the sea from my childhood began to shine again inside me. Isabella went into labor at a simple hospital, one she had chosen carefully. As we waited, I remember watching her hand gripping mine, her knuckles white with pressure, her face covered in sweat, but illuminated by a sacred determination. I, who faced CEOs and shareholders without flinching, was trembling like a leaf. "You can do this, Isa," I whispered, wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. "You are the strongest person I know." She looked at me, her deep eyes full of pain and love, and smiled weakly. "We can do this, John, together." When Michael's first cry echoed in the room, a sharp, vital sound that cut through the tension like a knife, something broke and rebuilt itself inside me in the same instant. Holding him for the first time was the most important transaction of my life. In that moment, everything I had built, all the fortune, all the success, all the titles, seemed insignificant next to the miracle of that tiny, perfect life breathing in my arms.
He was small, with wide, dark eyes and an expression of astonishment at the new world. His little hands closed around my finger with a surprising strength, as if to say, "You're mine now, Dad." Isabella and I cried together, and in those tears, the dust of my empty ambition was completely washed away. Michael redefined us. Suddenly, we were a family. The apartment that was once just a sophisticated place to sleep transformed into a home, smelling of milk and baby powder, with the sound of lullabies playing at night, stacks of diapers where business magazines used to be. Every one of Michael's milestones became our new metric for success. His first deliberate smile, the first time he rolled over on the living room rug, the guttural sound of "da-da" he let out one Sunday morning, making my heart stop for a second. His curiosity about the world was contagious. Everything was a discovery, from the texture of grass to the flight of a hummingbird on the balcony. On weekends, instead of work meetings, I built pillow forts on the living room floor. Instead of expensive dinners, we had picnics in the park, with Isabella sketching in her notebook while I ran after Michael, who tried to catch butterflies with his chubby little hands. For a long, golden time, I believed I had found the perfect balance. I had the successful career, the family I had always dreamed of, professional respect, and unconditional love. I believed, with the naive arrogance of someone who has never truly experienced loss, that I had finally tamed life. What I didn't know was that fate was about to remind me, in the cruelest way, that perfect happiness is a house of cards, and it only takes one unexpected gust of wind to bring it all down.
Happiness is as fragile as glass, and sometimes the universe decides to test its strength. The trip came up as an unexpected invitation. A couple who were friends of Isabella had a cozy inn in the Blue Ridge Mountains near Asheville, North Carolina, and insisted we spend a long weekend there. "It'll be good for Michael to see the mountains," they said. "The fresh air will do you all good." I liked the idea immediately. In recent months, I had been more immersed than ever in work. An important merger was consuming my time and energy. Isabella had noticed my distance, and I felt a dull guilt for not being as present. This trip seemed like the perfect opportunity to reconnect. Michael, almost 3 years old, was radiant. For him, everything was an adventure. His excitement in the car was a fire that could warm the weariest heart. He pointed at everything outside the window, the grazing cows, the creeks cutting through the landscape, the shapes of the clouds. "Look, Daddy, a dinosaur cloud!" he shouted, his face a round, smiling apple stuffed into a blue jacket. Isabella turned around and stroked his hair, and in her eyes I saw my own peace reflected. It was the perfect image of everything I had worked for and loved. The ascent into the mountains began gently. The landscape transformed gradually. Concrete gave way to green, the air grew colder and purer. We stopped at a roadside farm stand to buy local cheddar and apple butter. Michael chose a little wooden bird keychain, which he wouldn't let go of. "He's my flying friend," he announced solemnly. The trouble started when we reached higher altitudes. The fog, common in the region in the late afternoon, began to creep down the mountain. First, it was a light mist, a veil of serene beauty wrapping around the pine trees. Within minutes, however, it had transformed into a thick, opaque blanket swallowing the road. I slowed down, my eyes fixed on the reflective lane dividers on the asphalt. The world outside the windshield was reduced to a whirlwind of white and shadows. Anxiety, a familiar visitor I had kept at bay for years, began to whisper in my ear. "It's really getting thick, John," said Isabella, her voice calm but with a thread of tension. "It's okay, honey. Just until the next curve, it should get better."
But it didn't get better. The fog grew denser, hanging like a cold, damp ghost. The road, winding and narrow, demanded all my concentration. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. Michael, sensing the change in mood, grew quiet in the back seat. Then, on a sharp right-hand curve, the world fell apart. The patch of black ice, invisible on the dark, wet asphalt, stole everything. The car hit it and lost all traction, as if it were gliding over oil. The vehicle floated. The steering wheel went loose, useless in my hands. A second of surreal silence where everything seemed to stop. And then the roll. The world became a whirlwind of shattered glass, twisted metal, and the muffled sound of impact against the guardrail. A dry thud, a dull crash, the screech of tearing metal. And then a silence, more terrifying than any noise. What came next are flashes, pieces of a nightmare branded onto my soul. The smell of gasoline and damp earth. Michael's silence, his laughter extinguished forever. Isabella, unconscious beside me, her face pale, a trickle of blood running from her temple. Me, desperate, trying to reach the back seat, my body aching in places I didn't know could ache. Michael's small body, still strapped in his car seat, limp and still. My own screams, hoarse and guttural, calling for help on a deserted road invisible in the fog. The weak yellow beam of a flashlight approaching. The voice of a truck driver, deep and frightened. Oh my God! The sound of sirens approaching, a sound that should have brought relief but only announced the end of our world. They pulled me from the wreckage. I stood by the side of the road, wrapped in that icy fog that now felt like a shroud. In my hand, I don't know how it got there, was the little wooden bird keychain Michael had bought just hours before. I looked at that heap of metal that minutes before had been our car, our capsule of happiness. And I knew, with a certainty that hurt more than any broken bone, that our life as we knew it was over. In an instant, winter wasn't out there in the mountains. Winter was inside me. A biting cold that froze the sun of my childhood, the success of my youth, the happiness of my adult life. Everything reduced to wreckage on the shoulder of a foggy road. I had lost my son, and Isabella, though she survived, was taken away in an ambulance, broken in body and soul. I was left there, alone, holding Michael's wooden bird. The echo of his laughter was the only sound in a universe that had suddenly become completely silent and completely gray.
What came after the accident wasn't life. It was an existence on pause, a perpetual winter that had settled in my bones and refused to leave. They brought what was left of our world, or rather, of our bodies, back to New York. But I no longer inhabited the city. I inhabited an interior landscape of ruins. The apartment, which once echoed with Michael's hearty laughter and the soft music Isabella would play to dance with him in her arms, had transformed into a tomb of silences. Every corner was a monument to our past life. His teddy bear on the couch, Isabella's colored pencils scattered on the coffee table, the refrigerator door still holding his last drawing, a sun with eyes and a huge smile. I shut down. I shut down from work, from life, from everything. The calls from the office rang like echoes from another planet, a planet of empty, insignificant concerns I no longer wanted any part of. My partner, Richard, came by a few days later. I heard his deep voice at the door, mixed with worry and a hint of irritation. "John, for God's sake, open the door. We need to talk about the merger. This is very serious." I didn't open it. I sat on the floor in the hallway, on the other side, leaning against the wall, and stayed silent until he left. What was a merger in the face of a fusion?
What were millions in the face of the void of 1,000,000 years without my son? I spent hours sitting in the dim light of the living room, staring at the little wooden bird keychain. I would close my eyes and try, with a desperation that consumed me from the inside, to bring back the exact sound of Michael's laughter. It was a melody I knew by heart, but which now began to escape me, distorted by the trauma, replaced by the sound of the impact. I was afraid, with a visceral dread, that one day I would forget his weight in my arms, the smell of baby powder and childhood in his hair, the way he would whisper, "I love you, Daddy," before sleep. And then the silence outside began to mirror my own. First, it was the calls from those friends who filled the fancy parties and dinners. "John, I'm so sorry, man, if you need anything." The words sounded hollow, a social script expected to be recited in moments of mourning. They would hit my walls and dissolve in the air, meaningless, without warmth. Then the calls became less frequent, from daily to weekly to none. The phone stopped ringing. The world, the one I thought I had built with so much sweat and ambition, was turning its back on me without the slightest remorse. I discovered, with a bitterness that burned my insides, that I had been surrounded by partners, by acquaintances, by spectators of my rise, but not by friends. The company, my other child, my great creation, began to crack. Without my obsessive leadership, rumors spread. Investors grew nervous. Losses began to mount. Reports piled up like dirty snow at my apartment door. And I didn't care. Let it sink. Let it all sink. What was the use of a glass empire when there was no one left to build it for? And at the center of all this emptiness, there was Isabella. She was in a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center, fighting a silent, heroic battle in a body that no longer obeyed her. The spinal injuries were severe. Her life, which was movement, architecture, dancing with her son in her arms, was now confined to a wheelchair. I tried to visit her. I went religiously every other day. But they were the visits of a ghost. I would enter her room and sit in a chair, unable to find words. What was there to say? Our eyes would meet, and I would see the same ocean of pain that was drowning me reflected in them. It was a mirror of my own hell, and the sight was unbearable. She would try sometimes. "How are you, John?" she would ask, her voice a thread of broken silk. I would mumble something, and "I'm okay," that was the most obscene lie ever uttered. I would see the expectation in her eyes, the hope of finding her husband, her rock, and I would see that expectation die with each visit, replaced by a silent resignation. I couldn't be her strength because I had none left. Every visit was a drain, a confirmation of our collective bankruptcy. I would leave the rehabilitation center emptier than when I entered, walking the halls like a broken shell, a man who had been emptied of everything, even his capacity to suffer usefully. That was the real winter, not the one in the mountains, but the one in the soul. A cold that didn't come from outside, but sprouted from within. An underground river of ice flowing where there once was warm blood and dreams. And in that cold, in that total darkness, I saw no possibility of a spring. The world had turned upside down, and I was stuck on the ceiling, looking down at the wreckage of my life below, with no idea how or why to come down.
Rock bottom has no light. The bottom is just that, the bottom. It's a place of absolute silence, where even the echo of your own pain grows tired of resonating. And I was there. I had inhabited that place for so many months that I no longer remembered the taste of anything else. My days were an automatic, empty cycle. Waking up on the couch, the morning light intruding through the cracks in the closed blinds, staring at the ceiling, dragging myself to the kitchen to drink water straight from the tap without thirst, staring at the photo of Michael on the refrigerator until the image blurred, getting in the car, driving to the rehabilitation center in a silence that weighed more than concrete, sitting beside Isabella in the usual spot and just being there. 15, 30, 60 minutes of a shared silence that was less about companionship and more a mutual condemnation. That day was no different. A gray Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside was the same shade of gray as the room's carpet, the walls, my soul. Isabella was in her wheelchair, her back to me, looking out the window. In the external garden, a dogwood tree insisted on blooming, its bright petals an insult to our gloom. I sat down, I breathed, I waited for time to pass. She didn't move. She gave no sign she had noticed my presence, and I didn't mind. I believed, deep down, that my mere physical presence, however useless, was the last crumb of my duty I was still able to fulfill. The minutes dragged on. The hand of the clock on the wall seemed to spit out each tick-tock like a tiny insult. Then Isabella moved. She turned her head with a slowness that spoke of physical effort and an even greater fatigue of the soul. Her eyes, the ones that used to shine with the light of the sea and of dreams, were now wells of serene pain. In them there was no longer the flash of anger from the first months, nor the liquid gleam of despair. There was only a heavy acceptance and a question. She stared at me, not through me, not around me, but into me. It was the first true look she had given me in months. And then, in a voice that was just a hoarse whisper, almost swallowed by the noise of a fan in the hallway, she asked, "John, have you left me too?" The world didn't stop. The dogwood kept blooming outside. The clock kept its tick-tock. The air remained heavy. But inside me, something came loose and broke. Her words weren't a blow. They didn't hurt. They were worse. They were a mirror. Suddenly, with a clarity that cut my breath and made me feel physically dizzy, I saw it. I saw the scene from the outside. Me, sitting there, a man in his early 40s, in wrinkled clothes, unshaven, his eyes empty. A ghost visiting his own life. A specter who believed his physical presence was enough. And I saw her, Isabella, trapped not only in a wheelchair, but trapped in the same nightmare as I was. She who had lost her son, she who had lost the body that was her tool for work and expression. She who had lost the husband who had promised to stand by her in sickness and in health. And she, still, was fighting, every day, in painful physical therapy, in psychological counseling, in the simple act of waking up and not giving up. She was on the battlefield, while I had deserted. While I was drowning in self-pity, thinking my pain was the deepest, the most worthy of total withdrawal, she was carrying triple the burden and still found the strength to take a step, move a muscle, rebuild a fragment. Her question wasn't an accusation. It was a diagnosis, a terrible and precise diagnosis. Have you left me too? It was the realization that I no longer was there, that I had abandoned my post, that I had failed her the moment she needed me most. There was no glorious epiphany, No voice from heaven, no motivational speech echoing in my mind. There was only shame. A shame so pure, so sharp, so devastating that it swept away in a single instant the thick fog of my depression. It wasn't a warm emotion. It was an icy, cutting cold that ran from my head to my toes, leaving me lucid and disgusted with myself. I didn't stand up because of a flash of hope. There was no hope there. I stood up out of duty for the love we still had left. Because if I surrendered for good, we would both be lost. And Michael, from wherever he was, deserved for us to take care of each other. He deserved a father who didn't give up. He deserved a mother who wasn't abandoned. I didn't say a word. The shame didn't allow it. I just stood up, looked at her for one long second, and left the room. That day, I left the rehabilitation center, and for the first time since the accident, I did not leave as a ghost. I left with a mission. Spring had not yet arrived, but the seed of resilience had finally germinated in the frozen ground of my being.
The next morning, the world outside was the same. The chaotic traffic of New York, the gray sky, the trash piling up on the sidewalk. But my eyes were different. The depression hadn't disappeared. It was a heavy, familiar weight on my shoulders. A backpack of stones I had carried for so long. It was almost a part of me. But now, underneath that weight, there was something new. A purpose of steel. My first battle was against the chaos I had created myself. The apartment smelled of dust, abandonment, and sorrow. I opened the blinds. The sunlight, even if weak, hurt my eyes, accustomed to the gloom, but I let it in. It was the first act of war against the darkness I had fed. I started with the small, the tangible, something my hands could do, since my mind was still in tatters. I gathered the mail that had piled into a pathetic mound by the door. Bills, letters, business magazines that seemed like artifacts from an extinct civilization. I didn't open them. I just collected them and put them in a box, a symbolic act of dealing with the outside world. Then I went to the kitchen. I washed the dishes that had been rotting in the sink for weeks. The hot water on my skin, the smell of detergent, the mechanical act of scrubbing a glass, a spoon. Each movement was a mantra. A small stone I was placing on the swampy ground of my life. I wasn't building a castle, just a firm path so I could walk without sinking. I went to the supermarket. Walking through the bright aisles, surrounded by normal people with normal lives, was agony. But I needed food. I needed cleaning supplies. I bought simple things: rice, beans, fruit, a chicken. Things that Isabella and I could eat. Things for living people. In the afternoon, I took a shower. A long shower, brushing my hair, running the razor over my face for the first time in months. The image in the mirror was of a stranger, thinner, with deep dark circles, but clean. It was a start. And then I went to see Isabella. But this time, I didn't go as the ghost of her husband. I arrived at the rehabilitation center with a bag. Inside, a clean towel, a thermos with the chamomile tea she liked, and a quiet determination. She was in her room doing her physical therapy exercises with a therapist. She stopped when she saw me come in, and her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were seeing a mirage. The therapist left, leaving us alone. Instead of sitting in the usual chair, I approached. I took the towel from the bag. "Let's go," I said, and my voice sounded strange even to me, firm, without a trace of self-pity or sorrow that had characterized it for months. "Let's go. The therapist said we need to work on your shoulder movements at home. I'll help you." Hesitation. In her eyes, a flicker of doubt, of fear. Fear of letting herself hope. Fear of me breaking again. But she nodded, almost imperceptibly. That was the beginning of our new language. We left behind the heavy silence of resentments and paralyzing pain and began to communicate through actions. My hands, which once knew only how to sign checks, give firm handshakes, and stroke my son's hair, learned new functions. They learned to massage atrophied muscles with warm oil, the sensation of her skin, paler now, under my fingers. They learned to adjust the bed sheets to prevent pressure sores, to turn her body with careful precision. They learned to hold a cup with a straw so she could drink without spilling. They learned to comb her hair, to brush her teeth. I learned the patience that is born of love, not obligation. The patience of repeating a movement 10, 20, 50 times. The patience of seeing her frown in frustration, of seeing a silent tear run down her face when a muscle stubbornly refused to respond, and not giving up. The patience of wiping that tear away with my thumb and saying, calmly, "It's okay. We'll try again tomorrow." It wasn't inspiring. It was exhausting. There were days when I left her room and went straight to the center's bathroom to cry in silence, crushed by the helplessness, by her pain, by the immensity of our loss. But I didn't quit. Because every small progress she made, a slightly stronger handshake, a shoulder movement with one more degree of range, a genuine, unforced smile that arrived 1 second faster than the day before, became my new currency of success. I was no longer John, the businessman. I was John, the caregiver. The architect of a new life, infinitely smaller, infinitely harder, and built upon the only foundation the storm couldn't wash away, the love we had left.
Life, I discovered, is not about going back to who you were. It's about finding the person you need to become now. And Isabella and I, were carving out a new identity with 4 hands, with the patience of artisans. Our world became smaller. The horizons that once stretched to international business and luxurious travels were now limited to the hallways of our apartment, the small park at the end of our street, the drive to the rehabilitation center. But paradoxically, this small world became infinitely richer in detail. Therapy was no longer just a session at the center. It was the slow, triumphant walk to the park bench. Every step Isabella took, with my arm as her support, was a victory that echoed louder than any million-dollar contract. Success was no longer a number on a financial report. It was hearing the sound of her laughter, a true laugh, one that came from the soul, when a pair of robins decided to build a nest on our balcony. We learned to communicate in a new language, one of looks and micro-gestures. A squeeze of her hand in mine meant, "I'm tired, but I'm okay." A wink from her in the wheelchair meant, "Look at that cloud, it's shaped like a ship." We reclaimed silence, but it was no longer the empty silence of loss. It was the complicit silence of 2 souls who had seen each other at their worst and had chosen to stay. I made the easiest and most difficult decision of my life.
I sold the company, the one that had been my obsession, my other child. I did it without drama, almost with relief. My partners were relieved too. With the proceeds from the sale, I secured our future and Isabella's care for the rest of her life. The rest of the money I invested in the only thing that truly mattered: time. Time to be with her. Time to honor Michael's memory in a way that hurt, but also healed. We planted a dogwood tree in a community garden, the same species as the one that she had seen from the center's window, the one that had bloomed stubbornly in our pain. Now, we watched it grow together. It was our anchor, our living monument. The happiness we found wasn't the explosive, naive happiness from before. It was a conscious happiness. A happiness grateful for the simple miracle of a shared sunrise, for the taste of breakfast made together, for the strength I felt in her arm when she leaned on me to stand up. We had lost almost everything, but amidst the ruins we found a truth that many search for their entire lives without finding: that love is not an ethereal feeling. It is an action. It is the action of choosing to stay. It is the action of getting up every day and building with your bare nails if you have to, a world where the other can breathe in peace. Our new foundations were not made of concrete and ambition. They were made of patience, of memory, and of a tenderness that was bomb-proof.
Building upon the ruins doesn't mean they disappear. It took me time to understand this. I learned that loss is like a shadow. On bright days, it shrinks beneath your feet, almost gone. But on cloudy days, it stretches long, reminding you of who you once were and of what you once had. There were good days. Days when the smell of the dogwood tree blooming in the garden brought a genuine smile before the ache. Days when we celebrated with a small cake, a quiet glass of wine, the anniversary of a new movement Isabella had recovered in therapy. The day she managed, by herself, to bring a spoon to her mouth without her tremor stopping her. Those were silent victories, and their light flooded everything, bathing our new life in a soft golden hue. But the waves still came. They came without warning, triggered by anything. A little boy in the park, about 3 years old, wearing a blue jacket just like Michael's. The silence that fell over us was physical, a weight of lead. Her smile would freeze. Her eyes would fix on a distant point, and I knew she was back on that mountain road too. There were the dates, those invisible fires marked on the calendar of our souls. His birthday, the day of the accident, the day he said, "Daddy," for the first time. Those days were like minefields. We walked carefully, with an extra tenderness for each other. Sometimes the sadness came and stayed, like a heavy visitor who settled on the couch and showed no sign of leaving. And then there were the nights. So many nights. One of us, most often me, would wake with a choked gasp, the echo of twisted metal still inside my chest. And without a word, she would turn on the bedside lamp, a small beacon in the darkness, a silent message that said, "I'm here, you're not alone." Little by little, we accepted. The pain had become a permanent tenant in our home. We no longer tried to evict it. Instead, we stole its control. It no longer dictated our lives. It no longer ruled our days. We had tamed it. And in a strange, painful way, we were sometimes even grateful for it, because that pain was proof. Proof that our love for Michael had been real, immense, and worth every tear. Our happiness was no longer fragile like glass. It was strong like the root of an oak tree. It had carved its way through the stones of suffering
and now clung to the earth with a strength no wind could uproot. We had learned to dance, slowly, gently, with our own shadow.
With time, you stop counting the days since the tragedy and begin to measure life on a different scale. Not in years, but in layers of hard-won peace. And one day, looking back, I realized that all of it hadn't taken away anything truly essential. On the contrary, it had given me back something I had lost long before the accident: my own humanity. The success I had chased was a spectacle of illusions, a house of cards built to impress an audience that vanished with the first true gust of wind. My real legacy wasn't in the reports I sold, nor in the yellowed newspaper articles hidden in a drawer. My legacy was invisible. It lived in the serene strength of Isabella's hand, which no longer holds mine out of necessity, but out of companionship. It lived in the memory of Michael, no longer an open wound, but a beacon reminding us of the preciousness of every fragile moment. It lived in the resilience we came to embody, a resilience that isn't shouted, isn't posted, but lived in silence, day by day. Every now and then, young entrepreneurs still seek me out, having heard the legend of the high flyer who lost everything. They expect the secret to building an empire, the magic formula. I talk to them about patience, about the importance of listening to the silence between the words of those you love. I tell them that the only business that truly matters is the business of tending to your own soul and the souls of those you love. They leave, sometimes disconcerted, but I hope that for some, the seed will germinate years later. I realized that life is not a straight line toward the summit. Life is a valley where the sun shines sometimes and torrential rains sometimes fall. But it is in the valley that you find water, fertile soil, where the dogwood trees grow, and where true homes are built. And sometimes a true home means building it on entirely new ground. The peace we found was profound, but the city, New York, remained a gallery of ghosts. Every street corner held an echo of a life we could no longer live. We needed silence, a silence that was entirely our own, a landscape unmarked by our past pain. That search led us to the serene, orderly shores of Lake Geneva. Here, in Switzerland, we are not the people defined by that one terrible day. We are simply John and Isabella, building a life not on the ruins of the old one, but on the fresh, quiet foundation of the love we carried with us. I am no longer the boy from the coast, nor the businessman. I am simply the man who learned, too late and exactly on time, that everything he ever needed, he always had, the love we had left.
Life now has the texture of quiet days. Morning's taste of coffee shared on the balcony, planning an outing, or planning absolutely nothing. Watching how the dawn light caresses the dogwood tree we planted for Michael, and how its flowers, ephemeral and courageous, remind us that the purest beauty is the one that knows it must one day fall. Isabella and I have created a new language, one that almost does without words. It's the language of a knowing look over the morning newspaper, a squeeze of hands when something moves us on television, the shared smile when a memory of Michael visits, and instead of stabbing, it caresses.
She has found in her wheelchair a fortress that takes my breath away. With the hands that once drew blueprints for great buildings, she now knits small blankets and dolls for a local orphanage. "It's my new architecture," she says, with a smile that holds more light than all the spotlights of my old world. And it is the purest truth. Every stitch is a brick of love, a silent and powerful construction. Our home is no longer a place full of the echoes of hustle, but of the serene melody of a peace that was conquered, sweated for, earned. It is the refuge we built from the wreckage of the shipwreck, and it is more solid than any empire. Here, far from the noise of the past, we have found a rhythm that is ours alone. And sometimes, in the middle of this quiet, I feel it. It's not a voice, nor an apparition. It's a presence. It's Michael. It doesn't hurt anymore. It's like a sustained note in the song of our lives, a note that no longer cries, but harmonizes. It is the invisible thread that binds my hand to Isabella's, that transforms our silence into a prayer of gratitude. This is not the story I dreamed of living, but it is perhaps the story I needed to live, to understand the true meaning of the word love.
And so, we reach the end of this confession. Or perhaps just the beginning of your reflection. If you were to ask me if I would choose to live this life again, with all its rending pain, I would think for a moment. Because to say yes would be to betray the infinite love I feel for my son. But to say no would be to betray the person I have become and the redemptive love that saved Isabella in me. Life didn't give us what we wanted. It gave us what we needed to find our true purpose, to tend to the love we had left. I no longer look to the future with the ambition to build empires. I look to it with the quiet determination to care for our small world, to hold Isabella's hand in every sunrise we are granted, and to honor Michael by living with the tenderness and authenticity he taught us in his brief passage through this world. This story, the story of John, is proof that a person can be knocked down, reduced to ashes, and still rise again. Not because they are a hero, but because they are human. Because in the deepest part of our being, there is a strength that is only discovered when nothing else remains. And that strength is called love. And if this story has touched you, if it has resonated in some corner of your heart, then it was not in vain. Because it means that Michael, through our pain and our resilience, has touched another life. And that is the only eternity I believe in. From New York, from the coast, or from wherever you are listening, thank you. Thank you for lending me your time, your attention, and a corner of your heart. This is, and always will be, the love we had left. And that's all for today on A Coffee, a Story. Until next time, and take good care of your love.